do have joined with us today Reverend True Dharma Dr. Frank Tedesco will be presenting on diversity of Buddhism in America. A brief introduction. I would like to take a moment to give you about Dr. Tedesco. Frank Aka Saddhamma was born in 1946 in Brooklyn, New York, to second generation Sicilian American parents. He has BA, Bachelor's of Arts in Religious Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, in 1971, and an MA, which is Master of Arts in Religious Studies from University of Lancaster, UK, in 1974. He pursued doctoral studies in anthropology at University of Penn from 1975 to 1980, and a PhD in Buddhist study from Dongguk University, Seoul, Korea, 1998. Dr. Tedesco has published research on social and religious dimensions of Buddhism and practice of abortion in Korea. He is concerned about Buddhist social engagement around the world and end-of-life care. He has been a Buddhist volunteer teacher at Florida State Prison for many years, guiding inmates who have no experience with Buddhist values or meditation. Please welcome Dr. Frank Tedesco. Also, please accept the apologies that you had to wait for, like almost 10 minutes more. Dr. Tedesco, you can, yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm trying to adjust my screen here so I can see everyone. I have so many options here.
So are you going to present anything?
No, not really. I wasn't preparing to do that. I mean, the topic varieties of Buddhist practice in America requires a 16-week course of 2-hour lectures each. I'm basically going to talk about my own itinerary or pilgrimage through different Buddhist groups in the United States, starting from my high school days, and it kind of reflects some of the diversity of Buddhism as is practiced in the U.S. It's an immense topic that requires many volumes. In fact, there are many volumes of Buddhism in America available on Amazon and in your good libraries. By the way, I would like to have this to be an open discussion. So any questions you may have or your own personal experiences you'd like to share with us or with me, it would be very much appreciated. I am not the reigning expert on diversity of Buddhism in America. There are so many different schools of practices, so many different ethnic groups that practice their own cultural forms of Buddhism. There are variations among American Buddhists in many ways as they've Americanized different ethnic schools of Buddhism. It's really an immense topic. And as you know, America is huge. When I talk of America, I'm talking about the North America, because there's Buddhism, and new Buddhist groups have appeared in Mexico, even South America and Canada over the last 100 years that are also very diverse and very interesting. And these different groups have grown with the enthusiasm of new converts who bring to Buddhism a vitality that doesn't always exist in the Buddhist communities that inherited their Buddhism, you might say, from their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. For those traditional Buddhists, sometimes not many questions are asked, practices are not questioned, and there's a great spectrum of commitment to actual Buddhist practice when it's not something that you've discovered yourself, but something that your mother told you to do, as it were. Um, uh, Children do not always follow their parents' will very well, and kind of children often write off their parents, what their parents want them to learn, and only discover their ethnic religious heritage later on in life, often towards middle age. Saying that, is there any questions about my approach? Anything you'd like to add? Hand raised. Is someone going to be moderating this?
Yes, Satyanath ji, please go ahead and ask your question. Yeah.
Hello, Professor. Um,
You look familiar. I think we've interacted before.
have we interacted before?
I think so. Are you from the Bronx?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, so we have interacted before.
Okay, okay. I'm glad. Thank you. I'm getting old, so I don't quite remember as well as the younger people do. I used to. So I was wondering whether you have read Dr. Ambedkar's Buddha and his Dhamma, and if you have, if you could outline differences between his concept of Buddhism or his book and other Buddhist books.
That is a huge topic and rather different than what I'm planning to present today about the diversity of Buddhism in America. I really can't go into that now. I'm not prepared, and it's not what I'm planning to talk about. But I think I will. I don't even want to bring up thoughts that come to mind now, because that would divert my whole presentation from what I want to share.
Sure.
Okay, so please excuse me. I'd rather save that for another session. Okay? Are you
Great.
okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So we're talking about, anyway, Ambedkar's conversion in 1956. Let's leave that as a date. And that was very history bound to India and the socioeconomic group of the untouchables of ex-untouchables. However, Buddhism in America is very different. And a few years later, in 1963, when I graduated from high school in New York, I discovered the first Zen Institute of New York in Manhattan. Well, it's called the first Zen Institute of New York. Actually, it's the first Zen Institute of America. It was the first Japanese-oriented Zen Buddhist group to be established in the United States. And actually, even in 1962, when I was a student in high school, I would take the Long Island Railroad on Wednesday afternoons into Manhattan to meet with a brilliant woman named Mary Farkas, who ran the First Zen Institute. And she introduced, it was an open house. Anyone could come and speak and ask questions about Buddhism. We're talking 1962, 1963 now, many years ago, before Buddhism became, you might call it, a mass movement in the United States. This is a pioneering Zen group founded by a Japanese man named Sokayan Sasaki, who was a Zen master in the Rinzai Zen tradition of Japanese Buddhism, very much related to the Chan Buddhism of the Kung Fu tradition that we just heard about in the very enthusiastic discussion presentation we had by Kabir, which I really appreciated very much. Sokayan Sasaki was an early immigrant to the United States in the 1930s, and struggled without any recognition at all, only among a few intellectuals who were interested in anything to do with Japanese culture. America was then, and still pretty much now, kind of racist and not interested in any contributions that Asians could make to their country. Come 1941, in the outbreak of World War II, Zen Master Sokayan was thrown in a detention camp until the middle of the war, when he was released and married Ruth Fuller, an American woman who was very wealthy and established the first Zen Institute in Manhattan in 1945, where it continued very, very slowly, attracting a few intellectuals here and there coming in to learn more about Japanese Buddhism, until the great surge of interest in Buddhism occurred as the World War II vets who had experienced World War II in Asia and in Japan came back to the United States and began reflecting on their experiences there and what they had learned, sometimes in intelligence, sometimes in personal experience through their residency in Japan during the occupation from 1945. They started coming to the first Zen Institute and learning what they could, and then branching out through the United States to discuss other Japanese ethnic groups and all. Anyway, here I was 16, 17 years old, began talking with Mary Farkas about Zen Buddhism, reading her Zen notes and learning about other schools of Buddhist practices in the US. Here I was, a kid, without any tutelage, any tutoring from any of the adults in my family, nor in my high school, nor in my community. No one at all was interested. So I was pioneering this through my own reading. And a casual acquaintance mentioned to me that there was another Buddhist group not too far away in New Jersey. So when I graduated high school in 1963, went off to Manhattan, continued studying, practicing Zen willy-nilly at the First Zen Institute and on my own, I decided to go hit the road like a Zen monk, like a Zen pilgrim, like on the road with Jack Kerouac and the beatniks, the first generation of spiritual seekers who wrote a lot, novels and essays about Zen Buddhism. I visited in New Jersey a most unique and important man, historically important man, a Mongolian monk named Geshe Wangyal, Geshe Nayan Wangyal, who was the first Tibetan Buddhist to come to the United States and establish the first Tibetan Buddhist monastery, which was called the Mongolian Buddhist Lamasery of America. in a small town called Freewood Acres, New Jersey. And in the summer of 1963, I went to visit him as part of my venture, visiting Buddhist places and having other experiences throughout the United States. I met Geshe Wangyal. Geshe Wangyal was an extraordinary individual. He earned what the Geshe degree in Tibet. He was at the top of his class. The Geshe degree is like a doctorate degree beyond that. It's like a postdoctoral degree in Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, logic, history, lineages, anything you wanted to know about Tibetan Buddhism. It was part of the curriculum for in mastering the Geshe degree. But there he was in New Jersey, penniless, living in like a beaten down old summer home, functioning as the priest for the Kalmyk Mongolian refugees who were settled in New Jersey after the Second World War, settled by the Lutherans, the Lutheran Social Welfare Organization. The Kalmyk Mongolians were the furthest western Mongolians in the Mongolian world. They were the first Mongolians to become settled and actually become farmers, but they maintained their Tibetan Buddhist faith. Even though at home they spoke their own language of Kalmyk Mongolian and Russian, which they were also in the Russian sphere and dominated by Russian culture. In 1959, the Communist Chinese invaded Tibet and attempted to destroy its culture and killed over 2 million Tibetans. And as you know, the Dalai Lama fled Tibet in that year and was settled in Dharamsala, India. Geshe Wangyal was part of that group, but he was called to America by these Kalmyk Mongolian refugees to help them. So he went to America and began maintaining the religious belief system and rituals of the Tibetan Buddhist Kalmyk style. Geshe Wangyal was very smart, very, very smart. He was the first representative of the Voice of America, speaking Tibetan, and also working with the Kalmyks and other Mongolians. And upon going to the United States, he began working surreptitiously for the CIA, helping the Americans reconnoiter and trying to figure out what the communists were doing in Tibet and what they were doing on the borderlands of India back then. Geshe Wangyal's dream was to invite His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the United States. And he succeeded after great efforts and after helping to convert hundreds of Americans to Buddhism. And he had a very special karma, this Geshe Wangyal. He had a second sense. He knew who he should cultivate. And among the small number of ardent Americans who were seeking for spiritual knowledge in the 60s, many of them who'd blown their minds and hearts apart using LSD, who were really a mess psychologically and looking for some psychological grounding he taught meditation to these folks. Among these folks were many, I guess you'd call it upper class, blue stocking Americans who were very well connected in Washington and who came from very wealthy, established families in New York and New England. These people were influential in their own social circles. They had contacts. And although the Kalmyk Mongolians themselves were not influential, they were very poor, in fact, as being settled in the United States with nothing, having come out of detention camps in Europe. He was able to raise enough money and network sufficiently in the highest circles of the American government and in Congress and the Senate to have a visa issued to the Dalai Lama. And Geshe Wangyal experienced the realization of his great dream to bring His Holiness to the United States in August 1979, which was a major, major event. His Holiness coming to America at that point. The issue, the Dalai Lama had visited other countries before he came to America. He visited Canada, Mexico, many countries in Europe. But the United States, because of the stress and relationships with China, had not issued a visa to him because they didn't want to upset the Chinese. And even now, the Chinese closely monitored everywhere the Dalai Lama goes, as old as he is, and really as uninfluential as the Dalai Lama is politically. He has great influence culturally, as we all know, how people follow and listen to the Dalai Lama. Anyway, so in August 1979, the Dalai Lama made his visit to the United States and gave his first Dharma talk to the Kalmyk Mongolians on the land in northern New Jersey that the Dalai Lama was able to buy, a few acres of land in northern New Jersey. And I happened to be very fortunate to attend that first Dharma talk, in fact, sitting at the feet of the Dalai Lama, practically right in front of him. I was living there at the Lamasery as a helping hand, studying the Dharma with Geshe Wangyal and other Tibetan Lamas that he had invited there, and helping as a carpenter, mowing the lawn, doing physical labor there as a worker monk, you might say, living there. And that was the first time I was able to shake hands with the Dalai Lama. It was an extraordinary experience. Geshe Wangyal attracted American PhD candidates in Tibetan Buddhism like Robert Thurman and many other Tibetan Buddhist scholars who went on to teach Buddhism at Ivy League universities and state universities all around the United States. But he was the catalyst for Tibetan Buddhist studies in the US, the first one. Now, many others have followed. There are Tibetan Buddhist centers now all over the United States, and not only in the Gelugpa tradition, which is the Dalai Lama's lineage, the very scholarly lineage. The Gelugpas, the Puritan sect, you might say, the Dalai Lama sect. But you also have the Nyingmapas, the Kagyupas, the Sakyapas, even and other variations. And many teachers in the U.S. have been ordained or recognized in multiple lineages. So I spent some time there, with the that was in so but I first met the Geshe Wangel in 1964. And in 1964, remember now, 1964 was only a few years after the invasion, the great trauma that Tibetans experienced in 1959. And when I went to visit, in my mind, I'm visiting a great Tibetan Lama, a master of meditation, a master of himself, an enlightened being emanating light. So holy you must be. When I went to visit Geshe Wangel in his humble house in Freewood Acres, New Jersey, I knocked on his door as a complete stranger. He didn't know who I was at all. I just had his address to go there, knocked on his door, went in, he invited me into this screened-in porch of his home. This was near the Atlantic City beaches. All these poor homes had screened-in porches because the weather was so hot and there was no air conditioning. And sitting in the front porch were 3 other Tibetan lamas, all dressed in their red robes with shaven heads and all. And they looked miserable. They were very hot. They were very sad looking. And they had just recently came from India after having experienced the trauma of their monasteries and teachers being killed and destroyed by the Chinese. But Geshe Wangel, they didn't speak a word of English. Geshe Wangel spoke very good broken English. Geshe Wangel invited me into his back room. He wanted to know who I was and what I was doing. I told him I was a student at New York University. I was on my way visiting spiritual centers, and I heard so much about you. And he said, "Let me tell you who I am." And he began to cry and really weep, telling me about the suffering of his people. Really crying very seriously. I was shocked. I went seeking a holy man, and here I found this weeping, to me, I was 18 years old, a weeping old man. And he pointed to the other monks in the front room, and I realized just how miserable they were and what they had experienced. And then he told me, he said, "You're on the road, but don't go on the road. You're a nice Jewish boy. Go home and visit and complete your education." I said, "Thank you, Geshe," and I left. Well, the shock to me was that, number one, what I thought was an enlightened being was weeping very seriously. And number two, he obviously wasn't all-knowing, because I'm not Jewish. I'm not Jewish. Even though I may look Jewish, I am not Jewish. And he gave me some very conservative advice. And as a rebellious young man, I was not about to do that, to go home and go back to school. Very wise advice and appropriate at that time, but that was not what I was going to do. So I continued on the road, taking buses, hitchhiking, riding freight trains, whatever. And I went out to California, where I met followers of another Buddhist teacher, Shenru Suzuki Roshi of the First Zen Institute, of the San Francisco Zen Center in San Francisco, in Japantown, San Francisco. At that time, there were only a dozen Americans who were following Suzuki Roshi, who was a member of the Soto Zen, the Soto lineage of Japanese Buddhism. They had no temple at the time. They were renting a Jewish shul, a Jewish synagogue that was, so many Jews had dropped out, had moved away, that they had to rent out their temple. to another group, and the Japanese community in Japantown rented that, and Americans started sitting in meditation with him at that time. He was so successful, as most of you may know, that the San Francisco Zen Center is this huge, socially influential Zen center in the United States, but especially in San Francisco and California. And they were responsible for obtaining the land in the Big Sur area and building Tassajara, the first freestanding mountain Zen monastery in the United States. So there we have the two lineages of Zen Buddhism and the lineage of the Dalai Lama, the Gelugpa. I experienced these personally in the first few years of my venturing away from home to study the Dharma. Any questions now about this long monologue? I don't want to spend all my time just reminiscing. I'd like to deal with where you're at rather than where I'm at. Any questions? Kabir, are you there? You may have questions for me.
I'm the host, by the way, but if nobody has any question, I can go ahead and ask question. Um, I heard about people traveling from one place to another, and maybe also the countries, one country to another country. I would like to request if you can talk about, like, in the context of, like, within the context of diversity of Buddhism in America, like, how hard was it back then in 90s for, teachers or other folks who, holds high ranking in Buddhism to spread Buddhism coming to the United States? And, it's definitely a diverse land, but at the same time, when we think about culturally perspective, um, how, like, what were the approaches to spread Buddhism, and I also believe that there might have been, like, people might have converted into Buddhism. So I also wonder how that took place, if you can talk about that.
Yeah. Well, there were at least two major trends, you might say. One was that in the 60s, when people of my generation, I'm approaching 80 next year, became interested in Buddhism, they traveled to India and Japan and Taiwan and discovered Buddhism there, or sought Buddhism there, met teachers, practiced for a while, and wanted to bring these teachers back to the United States. So often there were very committed individuals who became very knowledgeable about a certain tradition or a certain teacher, returned to the United States, and then obtained visas for them to come, often putting them up in their own homes and starting very slowly pioneering their establishment in the US, really starting very, very humbly. For instance, going to another tradition, the Hare Krishna movement, which is all the Hindu movement, which is all over the United States, started in a very similar way. Someone like Allen Ginsberg, the great poet, went and met Bhaktivedanta Swami and found this man who was willing to come to the United States and paid his way, usually with very little money, with very little social support, one or two individuals alone pioneering the person's visit and long-term residency. So that's what happened in the US. And another Tibetan Buddhist group, well, there are so many Buddhist groups, but almost all of them have this history of one or two or a family of individuals encountering them in Asia and then deciding to bring them to the United States and starting slowly through mouth-to-mouth publicity to attract followers and students and slowly but surely become more and more influential because of the charisma of the individual teacher. In Suzuki Roshi's case, he had been invited to service the Japanese community in San Francisco. The Americans were not involved in sponsoring him in the United States. He already was supported by the Japanese community there. And the Americans found him in San Francisco and began studying with him, sometimes to the resentment of the Japanese themselves, who didn't want these Americans taking up the teacher's time, as it were. But that's another issue, and a very minor issue that wound up becoming how established the first the San Francisco Zen Center is now. There were some individuals who it kind of initiated to move to the United States themselves, but you could never do it themselves because they needed visa sponsorship. And often they came from Americans who were non-born Buddhists inviting them to practice. On a few occasions, there are now hundreds of Tibetan teachers in the United States. And some of them were invited by Tibetans or Mongolians that had already become established here. And they were coming to perform rituals for their own families, as it were.
Thank you so much for your answer. Can I ask you one more follow-up question?
Sure.
So there are people back in 90s, those who came from different parts of world, right? Mongolia, Japan, India, Tibet, China.
Right.
I wonder if there had been any conflicts between their own perspective, how they spread Buddhism in the United States, their values about Buddhism, their different practices in Buddhism. So were there any conflicts between this community?
I have to say that Buddhism was very the traditions did not communicate well. It was only in 1950 through the World Fellowship of Buddhists that Buddhism, the different traditions, the Mahayana, the Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, met for the first time as representative of groups. I'm not talking about individual monks or nuns who would pilgrimage between the different traditions. It was only through the World Fellowship of Buddhists that they met for the first time in Sri Lanka. And even then, though they met and shared a commonality, there existed then and even exist now certain biases or judgments of the other traditions. Okay, the Theravada purists would think that anything that the complexities of the mix of shamanism and Buddhist practice that you see in Japan and Tibet is definitely a no-no. That is not the pure teachings of the Dharma. That is not they would kind of look askance at that. And then the late Mahayana people, the later Mahayana traditional people in Taiwan and Japan and others would look at Theravada Buddhists thinking, oh, these are old-fashioned people who did not evolve. They're hanging on to the past. They're not adapting to the needs of our new capitalist society where monks shouldn't be supported and bring down the wealth of the community. Monks should be self-sufficient, married, have jobs, integrate into society better. So there's these arguments that have gone back and forth for 75 years at least, or longer. Usually not overt, but certainly spoken of. There is a sense that they're there, and also what was controversial is the ordination of women to receive full bhikkhuni vows. That was resisted. It's been resisted for hundreds of years, even though the Buddha himself ordained women. In the earliest days of Buddhism, there were monks and nuns who produced wonderful spiritual literature, Buddhist literature back then, teachings. But later on, even within the Dalai Lama, as enlightened as the Dalai Lama is, there are many, many monks and lineages and families of monks who were very resistant to getting full ordination, giving full ordination to women. So you find that women in Southeast Asia, even Tibetans, will go to Taiwan or to international meetings in Korea or in Japan or in the United States to receive ordination for full bhikkhuni ordination without the blessings of their, quote, home traditions.
Thank you so much for this information.
There's another, also want to add a very important, so I mentioned the Zen traditions of Japan, the Tibetan traditions of Geshe Wangyal and the Dalai Lama. A very important tradition is the Chinese traditions of coming out of Taiwan. And a great teacher of Xuanhua, Abbot Xuanhua, who founded the land of 10,000 Buddhas in Ukiah, northern California. I also studied with him in San Francisco. In fact, I took refuge with Xuanhua Pasha in 1968. He was an incredible meditation master and scholar who had memorized tomes and tomes and tomes of Buddhist scriptures in Chinese. He could sit on the throne mounted on the altar and speak, recite from memory incredibly long sutras without holding them in front of his hand. And his scribes, very brilliant, usually American monks and nuns, would write down his commentaries in Chinese as he spoke. Recite the sutra and then give a commentary on it, the Mahayana Sutras. And he attracted many incredibly committed people. It's interesting that many converts to Buddhism among the Americans, right, they were kind of renouncing their past. I mean, unlike Ambedkar Buddhists who come here is a whole different situation. You move to the United States, bringing your tradition and families with you. The American converts to Buddhism usually had conflicts with their own traditions, their Christian and Jewish traditions, conflicts with their families, gave up often their family life, at least of their parents and grandparents, and to adopt with incredible enthusiasm these new traditions with all their intelligence, energy, and money to establish these groups. And they often sought out the most austere, demanding traditions and teachers. They didn't want a lukewarm Buddhism. They didn't want a Sunday Buddhism. They wanted a Buddhism that was 24/7, 365 days a year. And that's what the disciples of Xuanhua, Totang Tulku, Dudjom Rinpoche, the Sakya traditions, all the traditions of coming out of the foundation for the preservation of the Mahayana tradition. These were monks and nuns, men and women, who wanted to do Buddhism full time. This was their new life. And so it took that kind of commitment for them to devote their entire lives to establish this 2,500-year tradition in America. So I really wanted to bring that, I emphasize that to the Ambedkar Buddhists I know from my travels living with you guys in India, at Manuski and in Nagpur, that it's a whole different social, cultural, economic world of American Buddhism or Western Buddhism. And what I'm saying about American experience, I say for the experience of Europeans who convert to Buddhism also in Italy, France, Norway, Spain, South America, Mexico. When you look at the map of Zen traditions, like for instance, there's a Korean tradition here called the Zen Buddhist Temple.org. It's based, they have temples, the Buddhist Society for Compassion and Wisdom. They're in Ann Arbor, Chicago, New York City, Claremont, New York, Toronto, in Mexico. And I'm talking about establishing Buddhist centers from the ground up, literally building the buildings themselves with their own muscles, doing it their way and really owning the tradition 24/7. So these early Western pioneers in Buddhism are kind of like the early pilgrims of Korea, China, Japan, who traveled to India to get the original scriptures, studied there for many years, and then went back home to establish, again, their new lineages in their home countries.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Mr. Satyanaji, if you can ask your question.
Can you speak up? I can't hear you so well.
I just said thank you so much for your answer. That was really helpful. And I'm going to invite Mr. Satyanaji to ask their question.
Yeah, hello. Thank you. Thank you very much for recognizing me. I have actually a couple of questions. You yourself regard yourself as a Buddhist or Buddhist monk? First for that.
I'm a lay Buddhist teacher. I'm just a Dharma teacher. And I was ordained as such.
Oh, you have not?
Yeah, credentials, and I'm recognized by the state. I have my own 501c3 religious organization called the True Dharma International Buddhist Mission. And I'm a visiting chaplain in the Florida state prison system, where I help prisoners learn about the Dharma in different prisons around Florida. And just last Thursday, I was appointed chaplain of the Tampa Bay Interfaith Association, a group of ministers of different traditions, the Christian traditions and the Jews and Muslims, appointed me to be their chaplain. So I'm a chaplain of chaplains for the Tampa Bay.
I'm wondering if a Christian chaplain has to be a priest or not. I mean, somebody without being a priest can be a chaplain.
Oh yeah, a chaplain is someone who's recognized by his education and recognition of his tradition to promulgate or teach the tradition. Doesn't have to be celibate. He's not like a Catholic priest or like a Buddhist monk. Can be someone who's a layperson. So in the Japanese traditions as well, almost all the masters are married or have been married or were married or married later on. There's a whole long history of lay teachers, lay meaning married teachers in the Mahayana tradition.
No, but anybody who is teacher is also called a monk.
No, a monk. This word monk is used frequently, improperly. A monk in English refers to a monastic person, mono, from the verb, from the prefix mono, one, who's by himself, one, living in a monastery where there's only one sex. But people refer, the term is used loosely for being someone who is a teacher of that tradition. But I'm not a monk, even though I'm sometimes referred to as a monk, because people don't know what else to call me. Dharma teacher is not really recognized in American English or American culture, unless you happen to be living in the Buddhist subculture. Okay, but not many people.
You mentioned that in Japan, the Buddhist teachers are, they marry and they can be married.
Yes.
So, but still after being married, they can be called a monk or not?
Well, no, they're called Dharma teachers or masters.
So there is no distinction in Japan between unmarried teacher and a married teacher.
A monk, properly speaking, is an unmarried man, usually living in a monastery in the mountains somewhere. He's unmarried, doesn't have family. Unmarried meaning does not have family responsibilities. He's not living with a woman and having children and all.
I simply thought that monk is another term for a priest.
No, a priest is someone who's trained or recognized by the tradition to perform rituals. So you can have Russian Orthodox priests who are married who perform all the rituals of the religion.
But then they are Protestants, not Catholics.
They're not Roman Catholics. Now there are spin-off Catholic groups that have married priests. I mean, there are 2 or 3 of them in my community right here in St. Petersburg. These are small organizations run by usually ex-Roman Catholic priests who decided to marry, but they're trained as Roman Catholic ritual leaders to perform the sacraments, and they do it, but without the blessing of Rome. Without the blessing of Rome. In the Theravada traditions, like the traditions that most Ambedkar Buddhists follow, you follow the Theravada tradition, where there's strictly a monk is a monk, a bhikkhu is a bhikkhu, period, and they're unmarried.
I thought the difference between the Protestants and the Catholics is that among the Catholics, the priests are all unmarried or Roman Catholics, and the Protestants did not want that, and they became, aside from some other differences. So
yeah, right. I mean, that's generally the case. But as I said, there are a few spin-offs or breakaway Catholics who do marry. Okay, and actually, and I'm not that much within the Catholic tradition, there are certain married priests within the Catholic tradition, Roman Catholic tradition. I'm not quite sure what the rationale is for that. They all have unique paths. But then we're talking about Buddhism in America, and I know, like in the Chinese tradition, they were very knowledgeable lay teachers, but they're not bhikkhus or bhikkhunis. They're just in the Theravada tradition. You have Anagarikas, which who were wearing white. They wear white, and they're lay Dharma teachers in the Theravada traditions. But there aren't many like them, because they have to survive. They have to, if you're not supported by your community as a celibate, I mean, that's why bhikkhus and bhikkhunis are called fields of merit. Their vow and maintenance of their celibacy is considered meritorious, is considered virtuous, and that's why lay people will support them and give them donations and help them survive and give them robes and all. Whereas they're not inclined to do that for married ones. Married people, they say, should fend for themselves, should support themselves. Whereas the monks and nuns are totally dependent on the lay people for support. And in turn, they provide spiritual teachings to the lay people. Any other questions from anyone?
Can I ask one more?
There's a question. Someone wants other people to answer.
Okay. Yeah.
Pranit, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just saying, like, we can invite few other people if they have any questions, because we also want to be mindful of the time. If anyone has any question, please go ahead and feel free to ask your question. Okay.
Hi, my name is Pawan.
Oh, we have a question.
Hi, quick question. So, how's recent inclination towards Buddhism, like a new generation, say Gen Z or millennials, American ones? How's their inclination towards Buddhism?
The great conversion to Buddhism occurred in my generation. The newer, younger people, as it were, seem not to be not as enthusiastic. When you go to many of the convert groups now, you find that the leaders of the group and the majority of the people there are in their 60s and 70s. The young people, not so many. However, there are groups like the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese teacher. That tradition continues to attract young people, probably because Thich Nhat Hanh was a master of providing teachings to everyone in simple language for people of all ages, so the parents could feel very supported by Thich Nhat Hanh's books, videos, practices, and all. For instance, I have a friend who's a folk singer who's composed songs, Buddhist songs, to play at the meetings that they have on Sundays, like going on right now, singing Buddhist songs about metta and about meditation, about helping one another, etc., etc. But some of the more austere, strict Zen meditating groups do not attract families per se, because they're too demanding.
May I add one more thing about Thich Nhat Hanh?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think he was a kind of very activist-minded Buddhist or Buddhist priest, preacher. So probably the younger people who are also activist minded, are more attracted to his to follow him rather than somebody who is just into religion and rituals. Am I right?
Well, I mean, from my experience right here in this area, there's a Thich Nhat Hanh group. It's about 35, 40 miles away from me. And they're quite active. They have over 300 members and all. They have a group of men and women who do Dharma work in prisons. So the people who work in prisons are Frank Tedesco's group, the True Dharma International Buddhist Mission, and the Florida uh, uh, mindfulness community in Tampa. So they're definitely oriented in that way. And again, that congregation is composed of many social workers, psychologists, uh, people in mental health fields, and the leader of that group is a full-time PhD psychologist. So he attracted people like himself there. But he himself doesn't do prison work, but among his followers, they do that. And they strengthen their own Buddhist philosophy and thinking by teaching to prisoners who are very committed. I mean, prisoners who elect to do Buddhist practice have to show a real individual commitment. Of course, it's not something that doing Buddhism does not come easy in the Florida system. Not at all. It's dominated by Christians and Muslims.
I thought Thich Nhat Hanh passed away a couple of
Oh,
years
yeah,
ago.
he did. Yeah, he did.
Mhm.
Does anyone has any other question?
Can I ask?
Oh, please go ahead.
Yeah. See, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. We Ambedkarite, as we call ourselves, Ambedkarite Buddhist, who are in a pretty much minority, are kind of struggling to build, say, viharas in various communities in the Bay Area, in Texas, and other places. Now that we have somewhat little mass, so to say. But we always have this question, how do we make sure that those viharas are supported, sustained over a period of time? Because building is one, and then having a monk supporting that as a group. And we always have this question as to how we make sure that this is a sustainable, financially sustainable kind of effort. And you have been in this field for so many years, you must have seen the struggles of building viharas and supporting them. What are your thoughts? How do we go about?
Well, it's you ask a very important question, and I have to say that Buddhism. I'll have to say this. I'm not going to give a very big generalization, and then I'll support it from my experience. Buddhism was not a religion of the very, very poor, even from the start. Most people who could renounce the world to follow the Buddha had to have something to renounce and leave behind their families who could fend for themselves because they already had some kind of substantial mode of subsistence or sustenance. They would support the monks by giving them food and robes, their own food that they prepared and made a little extra to put in the bowls of the begging monks, and give them robes that are just available, if not a great sacrifice to give them robes. In Europe and in the United States, what I've seen is that besides the usual fundraising among the masses of converts, and this you see in the Chinese tradition, the Japanese tradition, I mean, among the immigrants I'm talking about, and even among the Vietnamese, wealthy individuals will provide the majority, the greater portion of the money that's necessary to build a temple or to build a retreat center or to buy cars for the monks and nuns or to buy books for the Sunday school. You know, Buddhism spread throughout the world through the monks and nuns. Monks were followers of the merchants along the trade routes of China and Mongolia and Southeast Asia, either by sea or by land. Whenever communities, the merchants, and there were so many of them, don't forget, in long pilgrimages, not pilgrimages, long groups, convoys of merchants with many animals carrying all kinds of goods, right? As merchants, wanted the presence of of monks and nuns to maintain peace and be intermediaries with the people they would work with, who were not just involved in the money exchanges or in bartering. Many Buddhist groups who did not have the good fortune or the karma to have wealthy individuals join them and kick in the lion's share would struggle. They'd buy to get like Samu Sanim, who started this the group that I mentioned, the Zen, the Buddhist Society for Compassionate Wisdom, the group in you go to ZenBuddhistTemple.org. They would buy cheap houses in ghettos or in poor parts of town and do their own work, fixing up and repairing the homes themselves as part of their Buddhist practice. Getting up in the morning, doing 108 prostrations, doing the chanting, doing the meditation, and then working, repairing the roof, laying the cement for the sidewalks, fixing the plumbing, laying new floors, doing all that. That seems to be part of the American Buddhist tradition, bringing in the American spirit, the pioneering spirit of do it yourself. You know, do it yourself, using your own effort and individuality and skills that you brought from home to the Dharma path. And I know and you have kind of like this and it's often very interesting that when the majority of the work is being completed, some people drop out, but they found their Buddhism as a working Buddhism, as a building Buddhism, as a construction Buddhism. And when that was done, the quiet contemplative life of just practicing was not appealing to them. They would go on to find another temple, another community that could use their resources, use their energy, so they can use their muscles in Buddhist practice, as it were.
Thank you, Dr. Tedesco. That was really helpful. And we can stop here now. Just looking at the time. Again, I really appreciate you coming here and presenting with really, really important information today. And It's a necessity to know all about the history, origin, and how it has been widespread everywhere in the world. Thank you so much for that.
If anyone would like to contact me who's sufficiently interested in what I've said today, please contact me by email and we can continue. I can give you share more of my experience with you, you know.
Great.
I'd be very happy to do that. I'm a full-time Dharma teacher. That's what I do. So please contact me.
That's so nice of you. Thank you for that opportunity. Um, okay, so now it's time to conclude our online Vihara session today. I would like to thank Banteji, Dr. Banteji Sariputta Thero for providing us with Dhamma talk earlier this morning. I would like to thank Ms. Kranti Chauhan for conducting Kids Motivational Story along with Kabir. And in the end, thank you so much, Dr. Frank Tedesco. Really appreciate your time and valuable knowledge that you shared with us. Thank you all attendees for attending today's online Vihara session. I really wish you a great rest of your day today. And we'll see you next weekend. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.